Evil is usually loud. It announces itself with fire, with blades, with rage so obvious that even the innocent know to run. We are trained to recognize it by its cruelty, by its hunger, by the way it takes without asking. But what if that training has blinded us? What if true evil does not roar, but chuckles softly? What if it does not threaten you with pain, but promises to take the pain away? Before we speak of Nurgle, before we name him, define him, or judge him, we must first confront a far more uncomfortable question. How do you defend yourself against something that claims to love you? In the grim darkness of the far future, there are gods who make no attempt to hide what they are. They are honest in their brutality. They promise glory through slaughter, power through ambition, ecstasy through excess. Their bargains are monstrous, but at least they are clear. Nurgle is different. Nurgle smiles. Nurgle laughs. Nurgle calls himself a grandfather. And that alone should unsettle you more than any mountain of skulls ever could. Because kindness, when worn by a god, is not the same thing as kindness when offered by a mortal. To most who glance at him from a distance, Nurgle seems almost gentle. A god of decay, yes, but also of life. A god of disease, but also of endurance. His followers do not scream endlessly in agony, many of them laugh through ruptured lungs and rotting flesh. They speak of acceptance, of peace, of being free from fear. And so the question begins to rot its way into the mind: can something that relieves suffering truly be evil? That question is the doorway. And once you step through it, Nurgle has already won. Because evil is not defined by how much pain it causes. Pain is simple. Pain is obvious. Pain inspires resistance. Pain creates heroes, rebellions, desperate last stands. Nurgle understands this better than any other power in existence. He understands that pain can be endured, but hopelessness cannot. Pain can be fought, but surrender cannot. And so he does not rule through terror. He rules through inevitability. Nurgle does not ask you to worship him at the height of your strength. He waits. He waits for the fever that will not break. For the wound that will not heal. For the war that never ends. He waits until the universe has taught you its most important lesson, that nothing you do matters anymore. And only then does he extend a hand, not as a conqueror, but as a comfort. This is why so many misunderstand him. They see only the end of the story, not the beginning. They see the laughter, not the despair that came before it. They see the resilience, not the moment when resistance finally collapsed. To them, Nurgle looks like mercy. But mercy is not defined by how it feels in the moment. Mercy is defined by what it costs you in the end. And the cost Nurgle demands is always the same. Hope. Hope is dangerous. Hope is movement. Hope is change. Hope is the belief that tomorrow can be different from today. In a universe defined by endless war and slow extinction, hope is the last enemy Nurgle must defeat. He does not crush it outright. That would be crude. Instead, he teaches you that hope is foolish. That struggle is exhausting. That acceptance is wiser than resistance. He teaches you to stop asking, "What if?" and start saying, "This is how things are." Once you accept decay, decay owns you. This is why the image of Nurgle is a bloated, laughing god is not comedic, it is obscene. He laughs because he has already succeeded. He laughs because the battle is over before it begins. He laughs because every civilization, every species, every individual eventually arrives at the same conclusion: everything breaks down. Everything rots. Everything ends. And when that realization finally crushes the spirit, Nurgle is there. To say, "It's all right. You don't have to hurt anymore." But what he never says, what he never needs to say, is that you will never heal either. To understand how evil Nurgle truly is, we must strip away the comforting lies that cling to him like flies to carrion. We must stop thinking of him as a god of disease and start thinking of him as a god of philosophy. Disease is only his language. Decay is only his method. His true domain is resignation. His true weapon is the belief that fighting back is meaningless. And this is why he is so beloved by the broken. The soldier who has watched worlds burn and can no longer imagine peace. The citizen who has lived under endless oppression until rebellion feels childish. The dying who are tired of pain and tired of praying to gods who never answered. Nurgle does not force these souls into his arms. He invites them. He tells them they are right to give up. He tells them the universe is cruel, and that accepting cruelty is the only sane response. In that moment, evil does not look like a monster. It looks like relief. But relief is not salvation. Relief is simply the pause before something worse becomes permanent. Nurgle does not free his followers from suffering. He anesthetizes them to it. He does not cure disease, he makes disease eternal. He does not end death, he suspends it in a grotesque parody of life. His gifts do not elevate, they preserve. And preservation, when applied to rot, is one of the cruelest acts imaginable. This is the truth that lurks beneath the laughter, beneath the affection, beneath the title of grandfather. Nurgle is not a god who wants to kill you. He is a god who wants you to stop wanting anything at all. To stop dreaming, to stop resisting, to stop believing that decay is something to be fought rather than embraced. And once you accept that lesson, you become exactly what he desires, something that endures forever but never truly lives. So before we go any further, before we walk deeper into his garden, before we listen to his promises, before we weigh his evils against those of other gods, ask yourself this: if a power offers you comfort at the cost of all possibility, is that kindness? Or is that the most patient form of evil there is? Stay with me until the very end of this video, because by the time we're done, you won't just understand Nurgle, you'll see why his version of kindness may be the most terrifying force in the Warhammer universe, and why so many fall into his embrace without ever realizing they've lost everything. To understand Nurgle, you must first forget the imagery. Forget the swollen flesh, the buzzing flies, the ruptured armor and festering wounds. Those are symptoms, not the disease. They are the surface-level horror, easy to recoil from, easy to condemn. But surface horror is not what makes Nurgle truly dangerous. In fact, focusing on it is exactly what keeps you from seeing the real threat. The real danger begins with how Nurgle presents himself. He does not arrive as a tyrant demanding obedience. He does not thunder from the heavens or promise conquest and glory. He arrives quietly, almost apologetically, into moments where resistance has already failed. He appears when strength is gone, when endurance is stretched thin, when the universe has proven, again and again, that effort leads only to exhaustion. And instead of punishment, he offers understanding. This is the lie of kindness. Nurgle calls himself a grandfather, not a king. A caretaker, not a ruler. His laughter is warm, his tone affectionate, his presence reassuring. He tells his followers that suffering is natural, that decay is not an enemy but a stage of existence, that fighting against it is what causes true pain. He does not shame weakness. He validates it, and that validation is the first chain he places around your soul. Because kindness, when stripped of context, can be a weapon. A tyrant who demands obedience invites rebellion. A butcher who slaughters openly creates martyrs. But a god who says, "You've done enough. You don't have to struggle anymore," creates acceptance. And acceptance is far more powerful than fear. Fear can be overcome. Acceptance becomes identity. This is why Nurgle's followers do not scream in endless agony like the damned of other dark powers. Many of them smile. They laugh. They sing. They speak of peace and contentment, even as their bodies collapse into ruin. To an outside observer, this creates confusion. If they are happy, how evil can their god truly be? But happiness is not proof of goodness. A sedative does not heal a wound, it simply makes you stop feeling it. Nurgle does not remove suffering from the universe. He removes the desire to escape it. And once that desire is gone, suffering no longer needs to be justified. It no longer needs an end. Think carefully about that. Nurgle does not promise victory. He does not promise transcendence. He promises that things will never get better, and that this is perfectly acceptable. He teaches that hope is the real enemy, because hope creates disappointment. Hope demands effort. Hope insists that the future matters. Nurgle offers a simpler truth. Nothing changes, so stop expecting it to. This philosophy is why his kindness feels so convincing. It aligns perfectly with despair. It does not contradict it, it completes it. When a soldier has fought too long, hope feels cruel. When a civilization has endured endless war, optimism feels naive. When a dying body refuses to heal, belief in recovery feels like mockery. Nurgle steps into these moments and reframes defeat as wisdom. He tells you that letting go is not failure, but enlightenment. And this is where the true evil reveals itself. Because once you accept decay as natural and unchangeable, you no longer oppose it. You stop seeking cures. You stop rebuilding. You stop imagining a future different from the present. Stagnation becomes virtue. Endurance replaces growth. Survival replaces life. Nurgle's kindness does not lift you up, it pins you in place. His gifts are designed to feel merciful. Pain dulls. Fear fades. The sharp edges of suffering become soft and numb. But with that numbness comes something far more devastating, the erosion of self. Identity is shaped by desire, by struggle, by aspiration. When those are stripped away, what remains is not peace, it is emptiness that no longer cares it is empty. And yet, from the inside, it feels like relief. That is why Nurgle does not need to conquer worlds through force. Worlds rot willingly under his influence. Societies slow down. Innovation stalls. Resistance weakens. Not because they are crushed, but because they are tired. Nurgle does not break civilizations, he convinces them that breaking is inevitable. This is the paradox at the heart of his kindness. It feels humane, but it is fundamentally anti-life. Life is change. Life is movement. Life is the refusal to accept decay as destiny. Nurgle's philosophy opposes all of this. He does not hate life in the way a destroyer does. He simply refuses to let it evolve. And that refusal is absolute. As long as Nurgle's embrace feels comforting, his victims will defend him. They will call him misunderstood. They will argue that acceptance is healthier than endless struggle. They will say that there is dignity in decay. And in doing so, they unknowingly become apostles of stagnation, spreading the very hopelessness that first claimed them. So when we ask how evil Nurgle truly is, we must stop measuring evil by pain alone. Pain fades. Terror passes. But a belief system that teaches you to stop wanting a better future, that is an infection with no cure. And we are only just beginning to understand what that means. Because if kindness can be used to end resistance, then Nurgle does not need to be cruel at all. And that may be the most evil thing about him. To move deeper into Nurgle's nature, we have to abandon the idea that he is merely a god of rot and disease. That understanding is shallow, almost comforting in its simplicity. Disease can be fought, rot can be burned away. But Nurgle is not interested in outcomes that can be reversed. He is interested in beliefs, because beliefs outlive bodies, outlast empires, and spread far more efficiently than any plague ever could. At the core of Nurgle's power is a philosophy so subtle it often goes unnoticed, the belief that decay is not a failure of life, but its truest expression. In this worldview, nothing is meant to improve. Nothing is meant to be perfected. Everything is meant to wear down, slow, and eventually collapse into something simpler and quieter. Struggle, therefore, is not heroic, it is foolish. Hope is not brave, it is denial. This is how Nurgle reframes the universe. Where others see entropy as an enemy to be resisted, Nurgle declares it a teacher. Every broken body, every ruined world, every failed dream becomes evidence that resistance was never the point. The lesson is always the same: you were never meant to win. You were meant to endure, and then to stop caring that you are enduring at all. This is why Nurgle's influence spreads most effectively in places already worn thin. He does not need to create despair from nothing. He simply gives it meaning. He takes the exhaustion people already feel and tells them it is wisdom. He takes their surrender and calls it acceptance. He takes their hopelessness and crowns it as truth. And once despair is treated as truth, it becomes unchallengeable. Think about how powerful that idea is. If decay is inevitable, then fighting it is irrational. If collapse is natural, then rebuilding is arrogance. If suffering is universal, then seeking its end is pointless. Under Nurgle's philosophy, effort itself becomes the sin, not because it is immoral, but because it is unnecessary. Why struggle against a tide that has already claimed everything else? This is how Nurgle kills revolutions before they begin. He does not need to crush rebels. He needs only to convince them that rebellion will change nothing. He does not need to silence hope. He teaches that hope is immature. And when hope is seen as childish, those who still cling to it are no longer heroes, they are fools. This is why Nurgle's corruption often feels calm. There is no sudden snap, no dramatic fall. Instead, there is a gradual lowering of expectations. A quiet resignation, a soft internal voice that says, "This is just how things are." That voice is far more dangerous than any scream, because it does not trigger alarm. It feels reasonable, mature, realistic. Nurgle's greatest achievement is making despair sound intelligent. Once that mindset takes hold, decay stops being something to fear. It becomes something to respect, something to welcome. Disease is no longer an intrusion, it is a companion. Rot is no longer a warning, it is a reassurance that the universe is functioning as it should. Even death loses its finality, becoming just another phase in an endless, meaningless cycle. And this is where the horror deepens. Because Nurgle does not preach annihilation. He preaches continuation, endless continuation, a universe that never truly dies, but never truly lives either. Everything persists in a state of slow degradation, trapped between existence and oblivion. This is not mercy. This is stagnation elevated to cosmic law. In such a universe, improvement is impossible by definition. Progress is a lie. Change is an illusion. The best you can hope for is to become comfortable with your own decay. And once comfort replaces aspiration, the war is already lost. Nurgle understands something fundamental about sentient beings. Most do not need to be destroyed to be defeated. They only need to be convinced that defeat is natural. That belief spreads quietly, infecting minds long before bodies show any sign of corruption. By the time the rot becomes visible, the philosophy has already taken root. This is why Nurgle's plagues are never just biological. They are ideological. They infect how people think about suffering, about effort, about the future itself. They whisper that nothing improves, nothing heals, nothing truly ends, and that this is not a tragedy but a comfort. And once you accept that, you stop asking questions. You stop asking whether things could be better. You stop asking whether decay should be resisted. You stop asking whether endurance without purpose is worth anything at all. In the next part, we will step into the place where this philosophy takes physical form, a realm that perfectly reflects Nurgle's worldview, where nothing ever truly dies, and nothing is ever allowed to escape what it has become. To understand Nurgle completely, you must understand his realm, not as a location, but as a statement. A declaration made real. Nurgle's domain is often spoken of as a garden, and that word is chosen very carefully. Gardens are places of growth, of care, of nurturing hands. They imply life tended lovingly over time. And that implication is exactly the trap. Because this garden does grow. It flourishes. It teems with life. But it is a life stripped of purpose, direction, and release. Nothing in Nurgle's realm is allowed to end. Decay there is not a step toward death, it is a state of permanence. Flesh rots but never collapses into nothing. Bodies break down but refuse to stop functioning. Pain exists, but it dulls into background noise, softened just enough to be tolerable. This is not chaos in the explosive sense. It is order. A stable system of endless deterioration where every creature knows exactly what it will become, and knows it will never be permitted to move beyond that point. This is where Nurgle's cruelty becomes undeniable. Death, for all its terror, is an ending. It is an escape. It is the final boundary that gives meaning to suffering by promising that suffering is temporary. Nurgle removes that boundary. In his care, nothing is permitted the dignity of conclusion. Existence stretches on indefinitely, trapped in a loop of slow collapse and forced persistence. Life becomes something endured rather than lived, but endured forever. And here, immortality is not a gift, it is a sentence. The garden reflects Nurgle's deepest belief, that change is unnecessary and endings are overrated. Everything remains exactly as it is meant to be, broken, bloated, stagnant, and eternal. Growth happens, but it is circular. New forms rise from old decay, only to rot in turn, never improving, never escaping the cycle. It is evolution without progress. Survival without meaning. For those within it, resistance no longer exists as a concept. Why resist, when nothing you do alters the outcome? Why struggle, when the system is designed to absorb all effort and return it as more decay? This is how the garden enforces obedience, not through chains, but through certainty. The certainty that nothing you attempt will matter. And certainty is far more effective than fear. Those who serve Nurgle often speak of his realm with affection. They describe it as warm, welcoming, even joyful. But this joy is not happiness, it is resignation that no longer hurts. It is the emotional equivalent of giving up and feeling relieved that the struggle is finally over. The garden does not break spirits. It convinces them they no longer need to stand. This is why the garden is so important to understanding Nurgle's evil. It is not a punishment zone for enemies. It is the reward. This is what he offers when you accept his philosophy fully. A place where you will never be alone, never afraid of the future, never pressured to become something more than you already are. A place where expectations die, and with them, disappointment. But expectation is the engine of life. Without it, existence flattens into repetition. Days lose distinction. Time becomes meaningless. Identity erodes, because identity is built on choices, and choice requires the belief that outcomes can differ. In Nurgle's realm, outcomes never differ. Everything ends the same way, by not ending at all. This is the hidden horror of the garden. It does not torture its inhabitants with agony. Under his influence, identity slowly unravels. You stop defining yourself by who you were or who you hope to become. You define yourself by endurance alone. You are what remains. And as that definition narrows, individuality becomes unnecessary. Names lose meaning, roles blur. The self becomes porous, blending into the collective rot of Nurgle's domain. This is not unity through purpose, it is unity through apathy. And yet, it feels like belonging. That is the brilliance of Nurgle's cruelty. He does not isolate his followers. He surrounds them. He fills the emptiness left by lost ambition with constant presence, constant reassurance, constant noise. Laughter echoes. Companionship is unavoidable. Loneliness, one of the greatest drivers of resistance, is removed entirely. But so is solitude, so is introspection, so is the quiet space where doubt might grow. Love, in Nurgle's grasp, leaves no room for questioning. Because questioning requires distance, it requires the emotional space to step back and ask whether something is right. Nurgle never gives that space. His affection is overwhelming, smothering, all-encompassing. There is always another embrace, another laugh, another reminder that you are valued exactly as you are, decaying, stagnant, unchanging. And that validation feels irresistible to the broken. Those who come to Nurgle often arrive stripped of dignity by suffering. Disease humiliates. Failure degrades. Loss makes people feel small. Nurgle reverses that feeling instantly. He tells you that your weakness is not shameful, it is proof that you have understood the universe correctly. He reframes your collapse as insight. And in doing so, he binds your self-worth to your surrender. Once that bond is formed, leaving becomes psychologically impossible. Because to leave Nurgle would mean admitting that your acceptance was a mistake. It would mean admitting that the pain you escaped mattered, that the hope you abandoned was worth holding onto, that the version of yourself you let rot deserved to survive. Nurgle's love protects you from that realization by ensuring you never want to face it. This is why his followers defend him so fiercely. Not out of fanaticism, but out of self-preservation. To question Nurgle is to question the choice that saved them from despair. And if that choice was wrong, then the despair returns, sharper than ever. Nurgle's love traps by making doubt unbearable. And still, he never raises his voice. He never threatens. He never demands. He simply continues to care, continues to nurture, continues to offer comfort without end. But comfort without end is stagnation. And stagnation, when eternal, becomes a slow erasure. Not of the body, that happens naturally, but of the soul's ability to want more than survival. This is the final cruelty hidden inside Nurgle's affection. He does not destroy you. He preserves you in a form that no longer needs to be destroyed. You become content enough to remain exactly where you are, forever. And once love has taught you that lesson, force is no longer required at all. At first glance, Nurgle appears almost merciful when compared to other dark powers. He does not revel in sharp, sudden agony. He does not burn worlds in moments or tear souls apart in flashes of excess. His touch is slower, quieter, and far more patient. And this patience is not accidental, it is deliberate. Because Nurgle understands something fundamental about torment. Pain that ends can be survived, but pain that stretches endlessly across time reshapes reality itself. Nurgle does not want you to die quickly. He does not want your story to conclude. He wants it to continue long past the point where it should have ended, long past the point where meaning could still be salvaged. His plagues linger. They worsen. Gradually. They refuse to resolve. They deny closure. And in doing so, they transform suffering from an event into an environment. This is the cruelty of hopelessness. When a disaster strikes suddenly, people respond. They fight. They adapt. They rebuild. Sudden tragedy creates urgency, and urgency creates movement. Nurgle eliminates urgency. His gifts ensure that suffering becomes normal. Expected. Background noise. And once suffering is normalized, the desire to end it fades away. Not because it has been solved, but because imagining a solution feels unrealistic. This is how entire civilizations collapse without dramatic finales. Under Nurgle's influence, decay is not treated as an emergency. It is treated as weather. Something unfortunate, but unavoidable. Disease becomes seasonal. Corruption becomes routine. Institutions rot slowly, officials stop trying, and populations adapt downward, lowering their standards again and again until survival alone feels like success. By the time anyone notices what has been lost, they no longer remember what it felt like to demand more. Nurgle's cruelty lies in how thoroughly he stretches time. His plagues do not merely kill individuals, they echo through generations. Children inherit the consequences of infections they never chose. Cultures adapt to permanent sickness. Architecture, technology, and social structures all bend around the assumption that decay is constant. And because it is constant, no one believes it can be removed. This is not just physical corruption, it is historical. Hope does not die in one moment. It thins out over centuries. And this is where Nurgle becomes far more destructive than any force of raw annihilation. Annihilation leaves emptiness. Emptiness invites rebuilding. Nurgle leaves fullness, full of rot, full of stagnation, full of systems that technically function but no longer aspire to anything beyond continuation. He fills the future with more of the present, endlessly repeated. This is why Nurgle's followers often outlast their enemies. They endure conditions that would break others. They fight on through wounds that should have killed them. They survive environments that should be uninhabitable. From the outside, this looks like resilience. But resilience without direction is not strength, it is inertia. They do not endure to achieve something. They endure because ending would require effort, and effort requires belief. Nurgle removes that belief. He teaches that suffering is not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be accepted. Once that lesson is internalized, cruelty no longer needs to be inflicted. It perpetuates itself. People stop seeking cures. Leaders stop planning futures. Communities stop imagining recovery. The slow grind of decay becomes self-sustaining. And perhaps most disturbingly, it feels rational. After all, what evidence does the universe offer that things improve? Wars repeat. Empires fall. Plagues return. Nurgle does not invent these patterns, he points to them. He takes the worst aspects of reality and claims ownership over them, not by exaggerating them, but by insisting they are final. That they represent the ultimate truth of existence. In this way, Nurgle does not lie. He simply refuses to allow exceptions. Any moment of recovery is dismissed as temporary. Any victory is reframed as a delay. Any hope is labeled ignorance. Under this lens, despair becomes the only honest worldview. And once despair is treated as honesty, those who still believe in change appear delusional, dangerous, or cruel for encouraging false hope. This is how Nurgle turns compassion against itself. To promise a cure becomes irresponsible. To inspire resistance becomes misleading. To tell people that things can be better feels like a lie, because it risks reopening wounds Nurgle has numbed. In this way, his cruelty masquerades as kindness. He does not hurt people directly, he prevents them from believing they deserve relief. And so suffering stretches on, not because it cannot be ended, but because no one can imagine an ending anymore. This is Nurgle's true victory. Not the spread of disease, but the spread of the belief that disease is permanent. Not the presence of pain, but the absence of urgency. Not death, but the removal of any reason to want life to be more than it already is. And when suffering no longer feels like something to escape, it becomes eternal by default. This is the point where Nurgle's influence becomes truly unsettling, because this is where responsibility blurs. Other dark powers rely on temptation through excess, ambition, or rage. Their followers are driven, consumed, pushed forward by desire. Nurgle's followers are different. They do not run toward him. They arrive slowly, reluctantly, often believing they have no other option left. Nurgle does not recruit the strong at their peak. He waits for the exhausted, the sick, the forgotten, those who have already tried everything and failed, those who have prayed to brighter gods and received only silence. When he appears, it is not as a conqueror, but as the last open door in a hallway full of locked ones. And that makes the choice feel reasonable. When survival becomes unbearable, surrender starts to look like wisdom. When pain refuses to end, numbness feels like mercy. When hope repeatedly collapses, abandoning it feels like maturity. Nurgle understands this psychological breaking point intimately. He does not need to coerce belief. He only needs to arrive at the moment when belief has already died. This is why so many of his followers believe they were never corrupted at all. They see their decision as clarity, not collapse. They believe they saw the universe as it truly is and adjusted accordingly. In their minds, others are still clinging to comforting illusions, dreams of justice, recovery, progress. Nurgle's servants often see themselves as realists, not fanatics. They endure reality instead of denying it. And that belief is the final lock. Because if accepting Nurgle was a rational choice, then rejecting him must be irrational. Anyone who still fights decay becomes naive. Anyone who still hopes becomes cruel for encouraging suffering through false promises. Resistance is reframed as denial. Surrender becomes intelligence. This is how Nurgle transforms victims into advocates. Once someone has reorganized their entire identity around acceptance, they cannot easily go back. To do so would mean admitting that the pain they endured could have been temporary. That the loss they internalized did not have to define them. That the future they stopped believing in might have existed after all. That realization would hurt more than the suffering Nurgle numbed. So they defend their choice. Not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. Their worldview depends on Nurgle being right. If he is wrong, then everything they gave up was for nothing. And so they spread his philosophy gently, patiently, without force. They encourage others to let go, to stop fighting, to stop expecting improvement. They do not see this as cruelty. They see it as kindness, saving others from disappointment. This is why Nurgle's corruption spreads so quietly. It does not arrive as an invasion. It arrives as advice, as reassurance, as a voice that says, "You've suffered enough. There's nothing wrong with giving up." And in a universe where suffering is constant, that voice is incredibly persuasive. The most frightening part is that Nurgle does not need lies to make his case. He points to reality as it already exists. He points to endless war, to inevitable death, to the fact that everything breaks down eventually. His argument is not that decay exists, it clearly does. His argument is that decay is all there is. And once someone accepts that premise, resistance becomes illogical. Why fight entropy if entropy always wins? Why build if collapse is guaranteed? Why hope if disappointment is inevitable? Nurgle offers a worldview where none of these questions need answers, because the questions themselves are dismissed as pointless. In that worldview, choosing him is not seen as evil, it is seen as acceptance of truth. This is what makes Nurgle so dangerous. He does not demand worship. He offers relief from cognitive dissonance. He resolves the tension between suffering and meaning by removing meaning entirely. And for those who have been crushed by reality, that resolution feels like peace. But peace achieved by abandoning the future is not peace. It is a slow emotional extinction. A quiet agreement to exist without expecting anything more. Nurgle's followers may have chosen him freely, but that freedom was exercised at the moment when they felt they had none left. And that is the cruel irony at the heart of his power. Nurgle does not steal souls. He convinces them they were never worth saving in the first place. To see why Nurgle stands apart, you have to look at him in contrast, not just as an isolated force but as part of a larger pattern. Other powers thrive on motion, on escalation, on excess. They pull their followers forward into something: victory, domination, transcendence, sensation. Even when those promises are hollow, they demand action. They create momentum. And momentum, however destructive, still implies direction. Nurgle offers none of that. He does not promise triumph. He does not whisper about destiny. He does not tempt with visions of greatness. His message is far simpler, and far more corrosive. Nothing improves, so stop trying. Where others inflame desire, Nurgle extinguishes it. Where others exploit ambition, Nurgle dismantles it entirely. And in doing so, he removes the very engine that drives resistance. This is why comparisons are so revealing. A god of rage pushes its followers toward endless conflict, but conflict creates opposition. A god of schemes pushes toward constant change, but change creates instability and opportunities for failure. A god of excess pushes toward sensation, but sensation burns out and demands more. Each of these paths eventually collapses under its own intensity. They are unsustainable. Nurgle's path is perfectly sustainable. Stagnation does not burn out. Acceptance does not exhaust itself. A belief that nothing matters does not require constant reinforcement, it reinforces itself. Once that mindset takes hold, it spreads effortlessly. People teach it to one another not because they are ordered to, but because it feels compassionate. It feels honest. It feels like a relief from constant disappointment. This is why Nurgle does not need victory. Victory implies an end state, and Nurgle despises endings. He does not seek to conquer the universe in a single cataclysmic moment. He seeks to slow it down, to thicken time, to make every age feel indistinguishable from the last. Under his influence, history does not climax, it plateaus. And plateaus are far harder to escape than pits. When things are terrible, people fight to escape. When things are merely tolerable, they endure. Nurgle specializes in tolerable. He dulls the sharp edges of horror just enough to make survival acceptable. Not good, not meaningful, just acceptable. And that threshold is where resistance dies quietly. Civilizations under his shadow do not collapse overnight. They persist, they function, they continue producing, governing, surviving, while slowly losing any reason to exist beyond continuation itself. Innovation becomes rare, reform feels unnecessary. The future shrinks until it is nothing more than a repetition of the present. And no one panics. This is Nurgle's silent war against life itself. Not against living bodies, but against the principle of growth. Life, by its nature, seeks to become something else. It adapts, it evolves, it reaches forward. Nurgle's influence arrests that motion. He turns life inward, back on itself, looping endlessly through decay and renewal without progress. In this sense, Nurgle is not anti-life. He is anti-change. And that distinction matters. Anti-life can be opposed. Anti-change disguises itself as stability, as realism, as maturity. It whispers that dreams are childish, that expectations lead to suffering, that wanting more is the root of pain. And for those who have been hurt enough, that whisper sounds wise. This is why Nurgle's evil is so difficult to confront directly. He does not ask you to do terrible things. He asks you to stop believing that anything better is possible. He does not demand sacrifices. He encourages acceptance. He does not force obedience. He nurtures resignation. And once resignation becomes a virtue, rebellion becomes a moral failing. Under Nurgle's philosophy, the greatest sin is not cruelty, it is optimism. Optimism implies dissatisfaction with the present. It implies a judgment that things should be better. Nurgle's worldview cannot tolerate that implication. To him, dissatisfaction is the source of suffering, not its solution. Therefore, the cure is not change, but contentment with decay. And that contentment is the final chain. Because a being that no longer wants improvement will never seek it. A society that no longer imagines a future will never build one. A species that embraces stagnation has already lost, even if it continues to breathe. This is why Nurgle does not need to destroy his enemies. If he can simply wait long enough, they will stop fighting on their own. Nurgle's genius lies in his patience. Unlike other gods who rely on force, spectacle, or coercion, Nurgle's power spreads through conviction. He does not need armies to conquer. He does not need chaos to triumph. His dominion grows quietly, inside the minds of those who already feel powerless. It thrives on the slow erosion of certainty and the subtle realignment of priorities. In essence, Nurgle's true weapon is the human, or mortal, mind. Every follower who accepts him becomes a vector, not because they are coerced, but because they have chosen him freely. They spread his philosophy without thinking of it as propaganda. They speak of acceptance, resilience, and peace, reinforcing the idea that resistance is unnecessary, even foolish. And because it feels like comfort, it rarely triggers fear or skepticism. It feels right, rational, inevitable. Nurgle's approach is almost surgical in its precision. Where others impose suffering, he reshapes understanding. Where others demand loyalty through terror, he inspires it through apparent benevolence. His gifts, immunity to certain forms of pain, resilience against death, relief from fear, were irresistible precisely because they seem like kindness. They feel like salvation. And yet, every gift subtly reinforces a single truth: nothing you do matters beyond enduring it. The true horror of Nurgle's influence is that it creates willing participants in their own stagnation. They arrive at his embrace exhausted, disillusioned, or broken, and he does not coerce them further. He simply provides validation, framing surrender as wisdom and acceptance as insight. In doing so, he turns despair into a doctrine. What once felt like oppression becomes a philosophy. And philosophies, unlike armies, are nearly impossible to destroy. Consider the contrast with other gods. Khorne incites rage, compelling action. Tzeentch manipulates ambition, encouraging schemes. Slanesh seduces desire, driving excess. Each offers energy, direction, and momentum. Nurgle offers stillness. He removes the compulsion to act, the need to hope, the desire to struggle. And because stillness does not provoke resistance, it spreads quietly and pervasively. This is why he is so dangerous. Not because he kills quickly or violently, but because he teaches beings to stop striving for anything beyond the present. He removes hope, but he does it in a way that feels compassionate. He doesn't crush people with force, he dissolves their aspirations. By the time the full extent of his influence is recognized, his followers no longer fight. They simply endure, spreading his doctrine naturally, imperceptibly, across generations. In essence, Nurgle's power is self-perpetuating. His philosophy ensures that those touched by it reinforce his ideals without conscious effort.